Hey, Stoney here with another game of Mechabellum. This is a game versus K-50-yuran. I'm just going to call him K-50 from now on. And in this game, I'll be playing as a supply specialist, and he will be playing as a giant specialist. Starting off with sledgehammers and arc lights against stormcrawlers and arc lights. So this is a little tricky to start with because stormcrawlers are very good against my entire starting unit set, precisely because they're all very slow. So it gives the stormcrawler at least a few more shots, soften them up considerably before they engage. I don't have a lot of options for chaff as well. Fans are not an ideal chaff because they are also very slow and they get obliterated by these stone crawlers. Crawlers are good, but my opponent also starts with 3 arc lights. So it's going to be a bit of a weak start for me. The goal is to time my unit so that my crawlers would do maximum distraction from these storm crawlers. Now, interesting to note with sledgehammers is that if you're running sledgehammers in a line against stormcrawlers in a line, they usually will miss their very first shot until the sledgehammers stop and start firing at a unit. So in a normal game, I like to put the crawlers behind the sledgehammers if there aren't any stormcrawlers to start with. The downside of that is that usually when the crawlers run ahead of the sledgehammers and get targeted by the stormcrawlers, the stormcrawlers' missiles will actually land behind the crawlers when the sledgehammers kind of walk in. So in this case, I put the crawlers on the side, and what I'm hoping to achieve is that the first volley of these missiles will miss the sledgehammers. The second volley would target the crawlers and will miss them as well. And then the third volley, hopefully at that point, my sledgehammer would have engaged my opponent's board. It kind of worked here, but unfortunately he still has 4 stormcrawlers, which is enough, or should be enough, to bring down my 4 very weakened sledgehammers. All right, let's go to round 2. Round 2 unit cards. A lot of great options. For my opponent, he can, of course, choose the Scorpion, seeing I already have 2 rounds of sledgehammers. But instead, he chose more chaff. I chose the Marksman because I noticed that he has arc lights sort of guarding the key choke points, so that my chaff is, the usefulness of my chaff is greatly diminished. So I want to make sure that I'll get his arc lights before they decimate my chaff. My opponent added three squads of fans. Interesting choice though. I thought the Scorpion would have made more sense considering I am going with sledgehammers, but 3 sets of fans is good as well because you can't really summon 3 sets of fans in a turn. You have to use the deployment, so that's extra 50 plus the 300 invested into the fans. So in the end, it makes it worthwhile if he can make this work. I've added a set of sledgehammers in the flank. I was expecting Scorpion, so I wanted to hold his units down as long as I possibly can. So I added a bunch of sledgehammers in the back, hopefully to flank in and also draw his crawlers away. It ended up doing a lot more because he didn't have any Scorpions. So the majority of his board here at the corner was going towards the flank, allowing my units to take tower and ultimately take the rest of the round. Okay, a set of interesting cards. Underground Threat is interesting because right now I already have a flank setup, so it will be okay. It will be not a terrible idea to reinforce this threat. I've also noticed that with the flank setup, these crawlers were likely to start walking towards the flank first. So having underground threat in the middle, it just adds another layer of problem that they'll have to defend. Since my first round flank worked so well, I've decided to add another flank, right? So if I can get tower here very quickly, I can certainly get tower here as well. This is really the downside of having a lot of your chaff behind the tower. So if you're new, just remember that if you have units kind of like this square here can be pulled with units on the flank, unless you have more units sort of on the line, right? So the way that the unit aggro works is that if you draw a circle around the unit, whoever is closest to the circle will pull that unit. So in this case, the closest unit is these sledgehammers. And because these fans and crawlers are even further behind these stormcrawlers, you can use stormcrawlers sort of as a proxy. You know that these units will draw towards these sledgehammers. I added a set of fans here. I'm expecting some sort of response, and my opponent did add a boat in response to my sledgehammers, so the fans actually did really great. The crawlers did go. Somehow, most of them ended up going to this side and getting destroyed a little bit by these arc light, but they did get the tower before they are completely depleted. So with 2 towers down, my crawlers are now moving in. They're doing great damage, and of course I still have my level 2 marksman, just one shot in these arc lights, and they'll make short work of this overlord. All right, perfect. Let's go to round 4. Advanced firepower control system is always very good, especially on a set of Mustangs. But I don't have Mustangs. I don't have any other unit I really want to use that for. It is an expensive item, so you really have to make it work on the unit if you're using that item. Mustangs are usually very good, and because you can also support that Mustang fairly easily. I took the haste module. I was thinking of putting on one of the tanks maybe, so allowing them to move a little faster, approaching the tower a little quicker. My opponent took the item as well and continued to add on more boats. So up to this point, I know that my flanks work. Now, I was a little skeptical about the boat threat, and I wasn't entirely convinced that my marksman will survive long enough on the ground. Now, seeing that he doesn't have a lot of anti-air to start with, I wanted to try my luck with the Phoenixes. There's another reason I want to use the Phoenixes is that there's absolutely nothing in the middle that can defend against the Phoenixes. And because I already have the flank on this side, I do expect a similar response on that side as well. So I'm not expecting my opponent to put down anything right in the middle. And instead, there's an opportunity because there's nothing between the tower and the Phoenixes. So as long as the Phoenixes can target from the center of the board, they will get to the tower very quickly. So the plan is we're going to put centralized Phoenixes with crawlers to clear. We're going to move them all the way to the middle of the board. And with a bit of luck, once this chaff is cleared, the Phoenixes will target both of these towers very quickly and getting the tower debuff, allowing the rest of my army to take care of the rest of his army. Alright, so the flank has been dealt with, but so is his front line. And as you can see, we got one Phoenix already aiming at the tower, and this one gets it. And then the other one is being taken by my blue crawlers. And again, a double tower debuff. And that allows the rest of my units to move in and to do the damage against his overlords. So right now, this is a fairly high tempo play on my side. I'm causing a lot of problems, and he is being on the defensive for a while. But eventually, I think the tempo will switch because he does have higher quality units. These cards aren't all that interesting to me. I think maybe deployment module may be good. My opponent picked Assault Fangs. I think that is a good choice because I am running very quickly into his line. So having more damage, even at the cost of a bit of range, is not a huge deal. These fans are pretty much chaff anyway, so whatever damage they could get for free is always a good thing. He added shield on his fans and he added more fans. So that's a good choice because he does want to stop my advance. So right now, he is able to flip this game over very quickly because of the high level overlords. They are currently being destroyed because I kept getting double tower debuffs. So what is a good answer against the overlords? Well, anti-air marksman is one answer. So I took anti-air on the marksman. And the other way to go about this is a war factory. This may seem a little bit premature at this point because I'm not entirely sure that he's going to hard into overlords. But I'm hoping and I'm banking on the fact that he's going to add more because at the very least, he's already added item to the overlords. He's got level on one of them. So it makes sense. And they've been doing a lot of good work, clearing out the chaff. And as long as this tower doesn't get debuffed, these overlords will clear up the rest of my army as well. So I wanted to preemptively stop that from happening by going War Factory. Looking at it now, it might be a little bit premature. I think War Factory is just too strong of a response at this particular turn. I think adding more marksmen here with anti-air might be better. And once I see him adding maybe a few more overlords, that might be a cue for me to go War Factory. However, adding a War Factory here does provide tempo and keep my tempo advantage because not only that he has to deal with the flanks, he has to deal with the center, and now he has to deal with the War Factory. So it's causing a lot of chaos in his lines. Now, my opponent is a 1800 plus player, so he knows what he's doing. He knows the importance of counter. So it's very likely that he'll put down something like a melting point to supplement his army and providing an answer to this War Factory. So let's see if it works out for him. Alright, so here's the unit round, and unfortunately melting point is being offered as one of the options. I took the sandworm anticipating melting point. Now there is a bit of a debate on whether or not the sandworm is a good choice for the melting point. It is very situational. I think as long as you can keep the melting point distracted and the sandworm moving, you have a very good chance of defeating your opponent's melting point. But if he can tie you down with chaff and you have nothing in front of it, and that allows the melting point to charge up to its full energy, full damage potential, then no, melting point will win against the sandworm. So it's a bit of a rock paper scissors with the sandworm and melting point, and it really all comes down to chaff and chaff clear. All right, added the sandworm, added a bunch of mustangs. So mustangs serve two purposes. Purpose number one is they are my chaff clear very early in the front lines. Purpose number two is that once they've done clearing the chaff, they will continue to move forward and they will become chaff themselves, tanking the damage from the melting point. So as you can see on the left hand side, once the initial wave is gone, now my mustangs are now tanking the melting point. I got a very lucky tower, right? So I do have a melting point lock onto my War Factory. So I got a very lucky tower allowing the War Factory to survive just a bit longer. Unfortunately, on the left hand side, I don't have enough chaff clear, and I've been shooting at those shielded fans for quite some time. And that is allowing my opponent to get the advantage and eventually bring down my War Factory. Now, unfortunately for my opponent, I still have quite a few units left over, and of course this level 3 marksman is going to do quite a bit of damage to this melting point. Alright, so now we're within the striking range of this game. I could push and I could simply win this round. Now the question is, how would I win this round? Now, last game I've noticed I have quite a bit of problem on the left-hand side with chaff clear. I was spending a lot of time dealing with Shield of Fangs, allowing the melting point to come to me very quickly. On the right-hand side, the Sandworm was doing okay, but I was expecting a much stronger response this turn. So I sold the Sandworm. What I wanted to do is I wanted to add more chaff clear on this side, perhaps getting range on this War Factory, allowing them to shoot at melting points a lot sooner. And of course, I want to prevent him from hitting my melting point, hitting my War Factory too hard. Couldn't do all of those, so what I end up doing is just adding a couple sets of fangs. Now I do have resources left over, so I added range on these Mustangs. But what I didn't know was the double combination of a electromag, a wide area electromag, which essentially slowed and removed technologies from all these units, as well as 2 Vulcan. Melting Point Vulcan is a bit of an old school build, but they are extremely dangerous. Vulcan is excellent at counting chaff, and whatever is left over, Melting Point is excellent as a counter to. So this is not going to look too good because the Vulcan is going to clear up my current chaff screen, which is these Mustangs, allowing the Melting Point to focus on these larger units. And of course, looking at this board, it does seem like the War Factory with anti-missile was just slightly premature. I'm sure the boats are still on the board, but he is not going into boats any longer, so I am not getting the full benefit of that technology. So a very strong round for my opponent. The combination of Vulcan for chaff clear and the melting point for single unit damage was undeniably strong. So what can I do? And this is a huge round, taking a lot of damage off my HP. Extended range War Factory is available, and I took it. Now, it is a bit of a double-edged sword. The extended range damage War Factory does decrease the damage output by 20%, which means now it takes longer for the War Factory to deal with these giants. Now, with the range buff, it can outrange melting points, just by a little bit, right? So right now, I am at 170, and melting point with range, well, also at 170, so not quite outranging melting point, but we're on even footing. So at the very least, I can shoot at him at the same time as he's shooting at me. Okay. The Vulcan is annoying, so what I end up doing is adding a set of sledgehammers and put them very forward at the front with the primary purpose of drawing Vulcan fire. I'm hoping this Vulcan does not take in Scorching Flame. Usually if your Vulcan is a primary chaff clear, you don't need to take Scorching Flame. So when he doesn't do that, I think the tanks will survive just a little bit longer. My opponent continues to add on Vulcan, so now we have 4 Vulcan and 4 melting points on the board against chaff plus 2 War Factories. There's also Iron Being. I don't think this is the greatest Iron Being. It's going to kill a bunch of Mustangs. But with the Fortresses, I think not Fortresses, War Factories, I think it is going to survive, no problem. Alright, so now you can see the range potential of these units. It's actually locking on to the melting point on the side. And if these crawlers didn't walk forward, it would have locked onto this melting point as well. So it is a very good technology. Just a slight timing tweak, right? So on the other side, I am locking on his units. Of course, he can lock onto my War Factory as well, no problem. But I do have that range. Or not advantage. We are on equal footing with range, so I am shooting at him at the same time as shooting at me. Melting point does charge up for about 5 seconds in order to do his full damage, and in that 5 seconds, the War Factory should be able to take him down. My problem right now is that I don't actually have anything that shoots up. And of course, there's shielded fans that I have to deal with. Now, with the tower debuff and with the locking on from the opponent's mounting point, this War Factory is going to not see the next round. Ooh, so now we're down to the wire. What can we do? The WASP is an interesting decision. My opponent does not have a lot of anti-air, with the exception of these fans, but these fans will get taken out by my Mustangs fairly quickly. So WASP with shield act both as a screen as well as a chaff clear for my side. My opponent added steel balls. Interesting choice. I think he was thinking of the same thing. He needed something that can do a huge amount of damage to my larger units, but at the same time providing chaff in the form of mechanical division. He added incendiary bomb. I think this is good. I think this will hit something in the middle where most of my Mustangs are. However, on the side, I already have anti-missile tech, so the incendiary is not going to be as effective. So now it's really just a battle of chaff. Who has better chaff and who has better chaff clear? Now, one thing to note, though, is that my opponent does have assault fans on lock, which means these fans pack a huge punch. And I'm just hoping that my level 3 Wasp, now at 1041 HP with the equal amount of shield, is able to tank long enough for my War Factories to deal with the rest of his army. I've added oil on his side, hoping that when these Vulcan are shooting at my tanks, the oil is going to ignite and hopefully killing off the rest of his army. It does ignite, and it does help out with the side as well. The Wasps are doing work, as you can see. Now the mounting point are now focusing on the Wasps, not on my War Factory. Okay, so this side is a little iffy because the melting point is coming a little closer and is getting a lock on the War Factory. On the other side, though, my opponent did not get the War Factory. So this is very close. Fortunately, I am going to take the round and ultimately take the game simply because of the WASP switch. And it is a very common switch, especially at high MMRs, because if you don't expect it, you're going to suffer a lot due to sort of the lack of anti-air, and if you're just relying on these large units in the very end. My advice, whenever you see a WASP card being offered at the late game, put something, a pack of Mustangs, right? Because that is going to mitigate your damage that much more. But overall, I think it's a great game. My opponent was actually matching up. I did a ton of harassment in my early rounds, but I don't believe it's paid off as much as I would like to. I think getting War Factory starting on round 5, I believe, was slightly premature. Could have gone with just more marksman at that point. I didn't need to commit into a expensive technology at that point. I didn't see any giants because now it gives him the opportunity to bring out his giant that will counter my War Factory. Well, I hope you enjoyed this game, and I hope to see you on the next one.